Well, President Trump's hometown newspaper, the New York Daily News, hates Donald Trump, okay? They hate Donald Trump. And so this was their front page headline today, which was predictable for the New York Daily News. I'm with perv. Trump endorses accused kid molester more. Now, Donald Trump's other hometown tabloid newspaper, the New York Post, loves Donald Trump. The New York Post is owned by Rupert Murdoch, and the paper is under a clear editorial order to love everything Donald Trump says and does. Until today, when even the Trump-worshiping New York Post ran basically the same headline as the Daily News, I'm with the perv, Trump backs Roy Moore. Donald Trump is unique among American politicians. He is the only one who has admitted and boasted about his preferred methods of sexual assault. He did that on the famous Access Hollywood video where he talked about how he could grab women any way he wanted, including the most sexually assaultive way of grabbing a woman. So it was no surprise to anyone that Donald Trump has sided with the perv, as the New York tabloids put it, because in Trump world, nothing is more forgivable or understandable or even worthy of boasting about than sexual assault.
Mr. President, is an accused child molester better than a Democrat? Is an accused child molester better than a Democrat?
Look, he denies it. I mean, if you look at what is really going on and you look at all the things that have happened over the last 48 hours, he totally denies it. He says it didn't happen. And, you know, you have to listen to him also. You're talking about, he said 40 years ago this did not happen. So, you know.
With the special election in Alabama only 20 days away, Roy Moore has not dared to have a public event since last Thursday. The campaign announced today that the communications director resigned, which brings the campaign staff down to 6 people. Last night, in an interview on a conservative radio show, Roy Moore did his best imitation of Donald Trump.
I have a great regard for women. I regard women's rights.
That, of course, was just as much of a lie as this was.
Nobody has more respect for women than I do. Nobody.
Roy Moore followed Donald Trump's example to threaten to sue his accusers, a threat that is every bit as much a lie when Roy Moore says it as when Donald Trump said it during the presidential campaign.
Do you plan to pursue any legal action with defamation against any of these people, the Washington Post, or anybody, regardless? Because some people believe that shows that you're serious about proving your innocence.
We're talking about the Washington Post. We're talking about the women involved.
Republican Senator Jeff Flake, who is emerging as the conscience of the Republican Senate, said this today.
I think the president made a big mistake there. I think that he should distance himself from Roy Moore, even if it means losing that seat. If the choice is between Roy Moore and the Democrat, I would vote for the Democrat if I lived in Alabama. To paint somebody else as more evil somehow because he has a more liberal philosophy than somebody who may have been a child predator, I don't think that's right. And even if you lose a vote in the Senate among Republicans, that's better than being the party of Roy Moore.
After President Trump re-endorsed Roy Moore yesterday, Republican strategist Tim Miller tweeted, "I just donated to a Democrat for the first time in my life. If any of y'all want to do so as well, enough is enough." In an article posted today, Tim Miller wrote, "Roy Moore is worse than an abuser of children. He is an abuser of children who is also a hateful bigot. This man deserves no quarter, no support, no defense, no cover, and no seat in the United States Senate, and he never did. In this election, it is not a close call. Abstention is not an option. Roy Moore is a disgraceful, bigoted deviant beneath our collective contempt." Joining us now, Tim Miller, Republican strategist, former communications director for Jeb Bush 2016. Also with us, Indira Lakshmanan, a columnist for the Boston Globe, and she's also with the Poynter Institute for Media Studies, and David Jolly, former Republican congressman from Florida, is with us. Tim Miller, your reaction to the president's re-endorsing of Roy Moore. Clearly, we understand through your tweet that you actually went to the point of contributing. But what's your argument to Republicans who say, I am going to write in a different Republican name than Roy Moore on that ballot?
Well, Lawrence, on this night in 1963, John F. Kennedy was to give a speech where the purpose of the speech was to say that our duty is not merely the preservation of political power. And that is all Donald Trump cares about, is his short-term political power. And that's why it was so disgusting when yesterday or 2 days ago, he came out and gave Roy Moore a clearly somebody that engaged in child molestation cover. And so my message to Republicans in Alabama is this. Look, everybody has a personal option. If you feel like you need to abstain, I understand that, but the reality is there will only be Doug Jones or Roy Moore in the U.S. Senate. And Roy Moore is a child molester, one who on multiple occasions abused young women as young as the age of 14. And he spent his entire career trying to undermine gay and lesbian Alabamans and Americans who just wanted to be with the person that they loved, and all Roy Moore dedicated his entire career to was trying to prevent them from doing that while he was trying to court or date, as he said, 14-year-old girls. This is a sick person. And so for me, if the option is Doug Jones, who I don't really know that much about, but he seems like a perfect replacement level Democrat, or Roy Moore, a pedophile, it isn't really a tough call.
To show how much the model of the Roy Moore defense so far in the campaign mirrors the Trump defense in the presidential campaign, we've seen Roy Moore's wife come out and defend him, just as Melania Trump did during the campaign when Melania Trump called all of the accusers of Donald Trump liars. Let's listen to what Melania Trump said during the campaign.
I believe my husband. I believe my husband. This was all organized from the opposition. And with the details that they go, did they ever check the background of these women? They don't have any facts.
Indira Lakshmanan, that is basically what Roy Moore's wife is doing these days in that campaign.
Yeah, I don't think it's really getting her very far, insofar as I think the people who believe Roy Moore continue to believe him, and his wife just sort of bolsters that. But people who don't believe him, I don't think she's convincing anybody. Look, Roy Moore is at the point in this campaign where he has lost Republicans like Tim Miller. And by the way, that was an excellent column, and I really, exhort that all of your viewers should go read that column. He just went through point by point. He's lost John Rogers, who was his communications director. He lost Representative Joe Barton, who basically was himself exposed today for having sent out a nude selfie and wanted to separate himself from Roy Moore by saying, well, I just want to point out this was a consensual adult relationship. It wasn't with a child. I mean, essentially, that's the low bar now that we're talking about in all of these sexual assault and sexual harassment cases. So he's lost a large wing of the GOP. And if we're really just down to Republicans in Alabama thinking that this is better than having a Democrat, I mean, I think we just go back to your covers that you showed of I'm with Perv. It's extremely disturbing, but I disagree with one of the earlier clips you were showing. Jeff Flake, when he says the president should do this, should not back Roy Moore, the reason he has to back Roy Moore is because if he doesn't, then of course his own actions come into question. He's saying Roy Moore denies it. The implication is that Donald Trump, denied everything I was accused of doing with more than a dozen women, and you should therefore believe both of us.
And David Jarley, we have actual breaking news at this hour about your former colleague, Representative Joe Barton, who Indira was just talking about. The Washington Post just moments ago has added to that story with the headline, Congressman told woman he would report her to Capitol Police if she exposed his secret sex life. And that is a story about Congressman Joe Barton telling this woman who had these photographs that he is now very embarrassed about, that he would engage the Capitol Police to stop her from spreading any information about him. And David, this seems like something that's going to be headed to the Ethics Committee in the House of Representatives.
Lawrence, and you know this, there is so much more that is going to break from Capitol Hill in the coming weeks as a result of women rightfully coming forward. And I don't want to speak specifically to a case I don't know a lot about, but I know this. Listen, Congress is a place where a lot of different types of people get elected. There are some very good people, but there are some very bad people. There are some creepy people. There are some freaks. There are people that you wonder how in the world did they first get elected, and there are people that behave badly. One of the things John Boehner did very well was he ran a lot of those people out of office. But the reality is we're going to see a lot more come of this. You know, what Tim did in his column and what Jeff Flake has done is very important, because what they are doing is giving Republicans permission to distance themselves from fellow Republicans. And it's very important in races like Roy Moore to give permission to Republicans to vote for a Democrat, to vote for a Doug Jones, to actually honor the principle of country over party. Republicans right now need permission to criticize their own, just as Democrats do as well, as we learn more from Capitol Hill.
If I could add to that, Lawrence?
Go ahead.
Just briefly. Tim. Yeah, look, here's the thing. This is going to be a Republican seat again in 3 years, right? And this is Alabama. And so hopefully the Republicans in 3 years, we can nominate a decent person. And there are plenty of decent Republicans in Alabama. So I don't think that voters in Alabama need to worry that this is they're going to lose this seat to, you know, pro-choice Democrats forever. And this is a short-term choice between two people. And the important voters in this election are people basically like me and Representative Jolly, college-educated Republicans who are trying to decide between just abstaining and voting for Doug Jones. That could be the difference in whether, you know, a bigoted child molester is in the Senate or not. And that's why Doug Jones is the clear answer.
I just want to bring you and our viewers up to date on this Washington Post breaking news story about Congressman Barton. Just want to read you the lead of this article. It says, Representative Joe Barton, who apologized Wednesday for a lewd photo of him that circulated on the internet, told a woman to whom he had sent sexually explicit photos, videos, and messages that he would report her to the Capitol Police if she exposed his behavior, according to a recording reviewed by the Washington Post. The woman spoke to the Post after the lewd photo was published Tuesday by an anonymous Twitter account. She shared a secretly recorded phone conversation she had with Barton in 2015 in which he warned her against using the explicit materials, quote, in a way that would negatively affect my career. And so, Indira, here we have a recording about Barton talking about this material and saying that he would use the Capitol Police to try to prevent her from doing anything that would negatively affect my career. And when you look back at the Anthony Weiner case, Nancy Pelosi forced him to resign from the House of Representatives basically for material like this. That was years before Anthony Weiner committed a crime for which he's now serving time.
Right. And you point out, Lawrence, that obviously this seems to have a criminal aspect to it, threatening someone. It's not quite extortion, but it's something like blackmail, threatening someone with legal action. I mean, look, one thing you point out, Nancy Pelosi, Democrats have been quick, it seems to me, in pushing for ethics investigations of Democrats in Congress like Al Franken, like John Conyers, who've been accused of sexual inappropriate behavior and harassment. We have not seen the same solid front from Republicans calling for investigations of GOP people. I mean, I do think for the great part, most Republicans in Congress have really stood against Roy Moore, which is important. But again, as Tim points out and David points out, we're talking about someone who's alleged to have assaulted children. I mean, girl teenagers. So again, that is a low bar. I just want to say one thing about Roy Moore, who continues just today was threatening legal action of his own against supposed libel, against the press, against the women who are making these accusations. And I just want to say this really is not real. That's not a real threat. That's a dog whistle to his supporters trying to say, you know, I'm innocent, you know, I'm going to go after them. And it's a threat to these women in the same way that Representative Barton was threatening women. This guy is trying to say, don't come after me because I could do legal action against you. Don't forget, the president himself, Donald Trump, before he was president, used threats of legal action many times against the media and didn't actually go through through with them. It's incredibly hard. The standard for libel in this country is very hard ever since, New York Times Sullivan case in the Supreme Court. So I think it's nothing more than trying to protect himself. It's not real.
Here is more from the Washington Post report. And remember now, they are reporting from an audio tape that they have heard of this conversation. The woman says to Congressman Barton, how would you use the Capitol Police? What would you tell the Capitol Police? Congressman Barton says, I would tell them that I had a 3-year undercover relationship with you over the internet that was heavily sexual, and that I had met you twice while married and had sex with you on 2 different occasions, and that I exchanged inappropriate photographs and videos with you that I wouldn't like to be seen made public, that you still apparently had all of those and were in a position to use them in a way that would negatively affect my career. That's the truth. David Jolly, when you hear that, and in the congressman's own voice, and you consider that Nancy Pelosi told Anthony Weiner he had to go, is this a situation where Paul Ryan comes in and does the same thing that Nancy Pelosi did?
It may be. And Lawrence, listen, there's a difference between fallibility and criminality, and we are all fallible in our own ways. I certainly am myself. But we are seeing 2 things emerge from this national conversation. And I think they're very important 2 themes that have emerged. One is we are beginning to see different degrees of offenses, and they are all wrong. Every single one of them's wrong, right? But there's a difference between the predatory nature of a Donald Trump and a Roy Moore and the behavior of, say, an Al Franken, which was still wrong, but a different degree of sexual harassment or sexual assault. And that is important because as the number of cases emerge, we need to be able to assess what are the different degrees of criminality and fallibility. The other thing, though, that we're seeing, and this is probably most important, we're seeing a variance of responses. We're seeing Roy Moore, and as Indira said, yell fake news and attack the victims and attack the credibility of the women. But we're also seeing people like Al Franken saying it was wrong. I admit it. I shouldn't have done it. I'm asking forgiveness. I want to say to the women, thank you for coming forward, and I accept an investigation into myself. We need to see that emerge in the national culture, men accepting responsibility. That theme's very important. Joe Barton has a choice tonight. Does he own this or not?
David Jolly and Tim Miller, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.